Hey, this is the first time fully watching this TEDx, and I wanted to actually watch it with you so I can narrate some of the things I was going through as it was happening. So here we go.
Today I want to tell a story about us and what.
Before we start, one of the first things that happened is as I came out onto the stage, there was some music playing that wasn't my music. And I made a weird gesture, like a Hulk Hogan, with my ear, like listening and saying, I don't know what that was. I said that mostly because I was super nervous, but I'm happy to see that they edited that out.
What makes us so different from the rest of the natural kingdom? Because even though we are natural, we do things very differently. I don't want to focus specifically on our thoughts and how our thoughts inform our designs.
So the thing about this video is that you can hear the audio is not super clear, and the video, it's really dark. When you compare it to the talk I did in Florida, the Florida one is like very bright and the audio is a little bit better, but whatever.
Inform how different our designs are. Where this all comes from, though, is a fear. We're afraid of the unknown. That's why you don't like breaking up. That's why we don't like death. But we're afraid of the complexity of the unknown. And we're afraid of nature in that way because cognitively, we're actually not even capable to understand the complex reality of nature.
You hear that? Little mistakes like that, incapable to understand, drive me crazy. And that's the thing with public speaking. When you're off the cuff, if you don't fully memorize every single word, you're going to say something stupid, and that's one.
Nature. And we'll even simplify our environments to be able to live within them. So let's think about death. That's the ultimate unknown. And one of the ways we deal with uncertainty is we create assumptions. A lot of us assume maybe we're going to go to heaven. There might be a couple thinking they're going to hell, but we make assumptions so that we can
I try and make a joke just to loosen myself up. But you can see I was so nervous and so cognizant of time. Like I felt like I really had to rush through this, that I didn't deliver those jokes with any enthusiasm or commitment, really. So they kind of slid in like they were just normal things I would say.
Actually deal with that complexity because we can't handle it. We've also made assumptions in our designs. So for example, Newton. We use Newtonian thinking to take apart nature, put it into pieces and study them in isolation. And then in that isolation, rearrange them to make more predictable and stable engineered environments. We've also built our cities on the assumption that unlimited technology and unlimited economic growth is the key to our well-being. Embedded in that, you might notice that we also have assumed there's unlimited resources and that nature exists for our consumption.
So you can see here I'm looking down a lot, and that goes back to this idea, or the fact that the lights were so bright I could not see anyone in the crowd, and that really severed like a link for me. I felt a little bit lost because I couldn't see people's reactions and I couldn't look them in the eye. So I just looked down at my monitor to see what slide was on behind me.
Assumption. So there's a couple problems with these assumptions. Is that we've assumed we're different than nature and separate from nature, so we've actually built ourselves separate and different from nature. And there's one key thing about nature is that it hates gradients. Nature will naturally, spontaneously, and coherently self-organize to dissipate any gradients. And so what we've done is we've actually created a gradient between us and the natural world. Our cities are so different. And I know there's a gradient because if we left the city, nature would take over. It's just a law of thermodynamics. So the problem with that, well, there's two problems. One, it takes a lot of energy to resist that natural state, that natural flow into our cities. So we put a lot of energy into resisting nature. And two, the greater the gradient, the greater the potential for collapse and reorganization. So the bigger and more cities that we create, the more the gradient.
The bigger, the more cities we create.
Becomes. But I'm not really interested in this idea of large-scale collapse. I'm more interested in how we could shift our systems by shifting our thinking. And that's where biomimicry comes in. By definition, biomimicry is innovation inspired by nature. One of the most classic examples is...
So the thing there is, like, I'm not super confident that it was clearly articulated that our thoughts inform our designs so that we embed our assumptions in how we design, or that how we think when we're in creation has a huge impact in what we create. So a lot of the cities, the assumptions that have gone into building our cities are old ideas from generations before us. And that's what I was trying to get at. And I'm not sure it's clear, but oh well.
This is Velcro. Velcro was inspired by the burrs that stick to your pants when you're hiking in the woods. It was invented by a guy in the 40s, a Swiss engineer who finally got fed up with those burrs sticking to his dog hair. And he took it under a microscope and copied that hooking mechanism to make one of the most successful pieces of our time. Another very commonly presented example in biomimicry is whale power. Here, engineers were inspired by the bumps of the humpback whale fin. And they copied those bumps and applied it to a wind turbine blade and found that this blade runs 20% more efficient at slower wind speeds and quieter than traditional blades. So what's cool is that we recognize nature's been doing design for billions of years, and it's actually evolving the designs to be the most efficient and sustainable that they can be. But biomimicry is about shifting our perception and recognizing that we do build with assumptions and have been building with assumptions. And then also recognizing that nature...
What's really funny is I'm actually like rooting for this guy as if it's not me. I'm like hoping he says something powerful or something cool. It's just, I guess, like an empathy of yourself.
Also designs in the very same context as us. So my paradigm shifted in 2004 when I was an engineering student at Queen's University. And I took this elective called Math and Poetry. I thought it was going to be the math of poetry, but it was really just math, and then an hour and a half of poetry. But the math teacher, well, both teachers were brilliant. The math teacher was really good at dealing right on. So the Fibonacci sequence is just a sequence of numbers that when you add the two numbers before the third, you get the third. So 0 plus 1 is 1, 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 2 is 3, and so on. And then he had us play with the geometries and shapes of these cubes. So a 1 by 1 cube and a 1 by 1 cube actually fit beside that 2 by 2 cube. So we made this beautiful rectangle called the golden ratio. We didn't make it. We thought we did. And then he had us explore, what if we connected those rectangles? We got this beautiful spiral. He says, well, where have you seen this before?
Even like the small things like that, connecting those rectangles, they're squares.
What about here? What about here?
You can be actually critical of yourself, can't you, when you're watching it?
The seed packaging of a sunflower. Or what about in the way that waves crash and fluids naturally flow? You see, this spiral is ubiquitous in nature. Even our skin pores follow that same pattern. And so we discussed the way that architects and designers have used this spiral and this golden ratio in their art and in their designs. And we talked about this natural relationship we have with it because we are nature. Humans came from nature, so we have this attraction to this form because it's so ubiquitous. We also talked about some of the most beautiful people in the world and how some of their ratios in their face actually fit the Fibonacci sequence. So here I was, an engineer, learning about nature and learning that nature does design, and it fundamentally shifted my thinking. All of a sudden, all the math and science I was learning to engineer the environment, I realized the environment's already doing engineering and we could learn a lot from it. So I got obsessed and pursued this biomimicry passion right up until a PhD. And through my PhD. And when I finished, my dad is a very practical farmer. He said, okay, Jamie, now show me what biomimicry is. And that inspired me to apply it and to practice the application. So I've partnered with Jay Harmon down in California and his company Pax Scientific. So Pax Scientific has made this impeller, and what is beautiful about this impeller is that it pulls fluids rather than pushes them. So it's a much more efficient at moving fluids, at mixing fluids, than a traditional fan, and it's a lot quieter. And why it's more efficient is because he's actually understood how fluids flow. So what's crazy about nature is that they will shape their forms to whatever the flows around it inform it to do. It's not trying to force anything, it's letting nature inform the design. You think of kelp and the way it'll curl in a crashing wave. It'll curl because it's trying to resist getting pulled up. So this can move 10 million gallons of water with the electricity of 2 light bulbs. I've also partnered with Tridel, a condo developer, to have us rethink walls. So as an art piece, we've developed something based on Chao Cheng, who's a designer in Amsterdam. Because when you think of walls, a good engineering
work
wall
of
is one that's
Chow Chang.
predictable, it's stable. It comes from that old paradigm.
So it's about here that I'm starting to get into flow. It was when I got to talk about the Fibonacci sequence that things started to shift for me. And I think it's just like, that was my groove. It was something that I experienced. And it wasn't so heady. I mean, even though I did a PhD, which is the headiest thing you could do, it is the practical application and these examples that, really I get excited about.
Of resistance. But think about a wall in nature. It could be your skin. And skin can grow, it can shed, it can expand, sweat, grow hair. It's so responsive to its environment, even at the local scale. This part of my skin's behaving differently than this one. So this wall, this art piece, is inspired by the pine cone and the way that pine cones will close when it's wet to avoid dropping its seeds and open when it's dry. And Chow has copied this mechanism without using electricity or any mechanical devices, a wall that opens and closes just because of moisture and rain. With B+H Architects, I helped design a house in India, which is crazy. But we use biomimicry technologies and principles in the house, specifically for passive ventilation. So we're inspired by the elephant and the barrel cactus. The elephant's interesting because those skin pores, those ridges, actually hold moisture in over longer periods of time, so in the heat of the day, it can evapotranspirate or evaporative cool the organism over longer periods. The barrel cactus has those ridges, which creates a natural shading. So it creates these little microclimates inside those ridges that will pull the hot air away from the barrel cactus. And now I'm working with designers, architects, and planners to reimagine our cities and communities, starting to get away from that idea of separation and build from a non-separation paradigm and integrate nature back into our designs, both in terms of how we think in biomimicry, but also in through biophilic design as well. So here we're reimagining what our cities could be. Imagine our cities function like a forest. Each tree is automatically and autonomously changing to its environment, picking up information all of the time and changing.
I'm really getting into this. Mostly just whether he's going to fail or not.
Self-heal, could breathe.
I'm still nervous.
Respond to winter and summer. Imagine we had local patches, decentralized services, so that we didn't have to rely on this system of importation and exportation. Or imagine creating economies like an ecosystem. It's interesting, if you think of a forest, there isn't a tree that's 600 feet above the rest. This paradigm of growth, survival of the fittest. We're actually learning a lot about nature, and it's a lot more cooperative than we realize. For example, there's things called mother trees. And mother trees will grow and get enough of their resources, and once they have enough, they'll actually start to distribute information and resources to other trees and other species, even competing species. The other thing about nature is that there's no such thing as waste, and everything is working. So imagine creating a circular economy where the waste stream of one industry is actually the product of another one, closing the loop. Or imagine making materials like nature and manufacturing like nature. The spider silk has a strength-to-weight ratio unlike anything we've ever made as humans. The crazy thing is that spiders making it at body temperature and pressure, using only the energy of the sun, and it's fully recyclable.
So I mentioned some of these in my old TED Talk, which is I'm not super pumped about, but the challenge with this is that people don't know what biomimicry is. That's the bottom line. It's still not that common. So you've got to go through some of these examples over and over again. And that was a balance. Even though I wanted to push a conversation and get focused more on the thinking that goes into design, I still had to share some of these classic examples like spider silk or like Velcro, which I talked about in my earlier talk.
Or imagine creating color like peacocks. Instead of using pigmentation and dyes and chemicals, you use a structure to reflect light in different arrays. So the cool thing is this is already happening. There's already self-healing concrete.
This is great. So I blanked there. I was going to give a couple examples of some crazy ideas that were already in production, and all I could think of was self-healing concrete. So there was the awkward pause.
And it's because technologies are emerging at this time where it's an incredible time. We have incredible technologies like 3D and 4D printing, additive manufacturing, computational architecture, big data. This stuff makes some of these crazy ideas real. And for the next generation, you have this incredible opportunity. Dell put out a study last year saying that 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 do not exist today. There's a huge transformation taking place, and the next generation are actually going to be building the next economy.
What I wish I said there was reiterating this point that you're either going to be disrupted or you're going to be a disruptor. Because I do think that industries who think status quo is going to keep them moving through the 21st century, I really don't believe that's correct. And with a stat like 85% of the jobs that will exist in 2030 don't exist today, a stat like that shows that things are changing rapidly. And with new technologies, if you're not already integrating them and you're not already consciously disrupting your own thinking, then you're probably set up to get completely destroyed. So I wish I said that.
So I inspire that next generation to start to think about their philosophies. Because the world is changing. And I inspire you to start to think about what makes you come alive. Because we're all a natural at something. To do biomimicry, you really have to get into a new paradigm because it's confronting this old way of doing things that we've inherited and become very accustomed to. So you really have to tap into your creative potential, tap into your flow, or what I call inner biomimicry. And start to dance with nature. Start to figure out how we can leverage nature and participate with nature in harmony. So there's two things I love about this photo. One, that's my buddy in the front, well, at least his feet. And two, we're actually paddling in the wrong direction. What we were doing is we were surfing a little standing wave there in the front. And it's this incredible feeling where if you get your canoe in the right spot, you don't even have to paddle anymore. You just surf the wave, and you have this euphoric feeling of being in total harmony with the power of nature. I mean, the indigenous people in Hawaii knew this. That's why surfing was such a spiritual practice, because you're on the precipice between chaos and this incredible power. So imagine we had a place where we can explore creating in harmony with nature and actually designing with a new paradigm and challenging the status quo. This is what we're doing in Guelph with something called the Biomimicry Commons. And it's a disruptor and incubator space for the next generation of technologies and thinking. And I inspire every community to have one of these. And a lot of people ask me, how do I do biomimicry? Or where do I do biomimicry? And I think the best thing to say for now is just change your thoughts and start to create, recognizing that nature does design. And start to challenge those philosophies that we do design with. Because if you don't know what your philosophy is when you're designing, you're probably just relying on the status quo. The way I see it, it's like a car, and your philosophy is a steering wheel, and if you're not conscious of the steering wheel, you're in big trouble. And even Einstein said, we can't solve today's problems with the thinking of the past. So be aware.
I remember after that just really overthinking that because I said it incorrectly, or at least not word by word. I think it's like the problems, you can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them, I think is the quote. So I was in my head, I didn't know what I said up there. And afterwards I was like, was it an idiot move? Did I say something totally wrong? And a couple things, this is an interesting part. I struggled a lot with the closing. There's stuff I wanted to say, but didn't know if it would land. And I'm fairly happy with what was said there. There's some things I would have changed, like really talking about that flow state, reiterating this fear of uncertainty and how we need to step into courageous exploration. And this idea of inner biomimicry, maybe going a bit more into that. But for 13 minutes, I mean, you only have so much time and you can only say so many things. And for me, I'm still struggling to articulate what we're getting at. So it is what it is, I guess, at this point. But this was the place that I felt we could have added some meat. And you can even see that I paused for longer periods of time. Those aren't dramatic pauses. I'm not trying to lure you in. I was just trying to think about what to say.
Care of your thoughts, because in my mind, your thoughts are everything. What we've built is a reflection of our thoughts. I even believe that nature is a reflection of our thoughts. So tap into your inner biomimicry and recognize that when you change your thoughts, you can change the entire world. Thank you very much.
Nice. Okay, so that's that. Generally, I'm pretty happy with it. You can only do so much, and this was a big thing for me. I set out a goal at the beginning of the year to do another TEDx talk because I wanted to keep that conversation going, and mostly because I just wanted to push myself. So there it is. It is what it is, and I'm happy with it, but the general goal is to get people to engage in this thinking and really to set it up so that people would go into a course, whether it's my course or another course, to learn the methodology of biomimicry and to, more importantly, learn the philosophy so that they start to see the world with this lens. Because the more people that are seeing it and the more people that are working together with that lens, I think the more chance we'll have to create technologies that really shift our system. And it was important for me to say why we need to shift the system. And so the beginning of this talk, I talk about gradients and how much energy we put into resisting nature. And that's where the big opportunity is to bring nature in, not physically, not actually bring nature in, but bring it into our design paradigm, and from that space start to create designs that behave more like nature. And I think from there we'll start to reduce our energy, and we'll bridge that gradient, that gap between us and nature, and ultimately improve our resilience, because the more we separate ourselves, my belief is the more and the bigger the potential for collapse. So if you're not in tune with nature, if you're not in tune with your environment, you're kind of screwed. All right, thanks so much for watching this with me, and hope you have a good one.